All right, welcome back. In this exercise, what we're going to be doing is building a simple calculator using SwiftUI. So what we're going to do is show you the end product first. So I'm just going to hit run over here, and there we go. There's our calculator. I can do like a 7 plus 9 equals 16. Hit clear. 5 minus 9 equals minus 4. Hit clear. 2 times 5 is 10. Clear. And then finally 2 divided by 9 is equal to 0.22222. So that's our end goal for today's exercise. So the first step is to build a fresh new project. So I'm going to have you open XCode. So we'll have XCode here, do a new project. We'll have iOS single view application. Hit next. I'm going to call it M1P2 calculator. And language is Swift. User interface is SwiftUI. So very important that is SwiftUI. And keeping everything else unchecked. Let's get hit next and give it a home. All right. And like last time, we have the same files auto-generated. All right, we have content view, a body, text, hello. We also have app delegate and scene delegate, which we'll talk about later in the course. This time around, what we're going to do is start off by defining a bunch of variables to keep track of the different operations we'll be performing for this calculator. And we're also going to be using state variables like we did last time. And so just to recap, a state variable, think of it as like a sort of static variable. The idea behind it is that it's going to keep track of the state of the variable and be able to apply it in real time where it needs to be applied. So it's really handy little operator there. So I'm going to say at state and var. Now I need a variable to keep track of the number that's been pressed, the digits that have been pressed. And a string is perfect because you can do a string join really nicely. I'm going to call it the number. It can be of type string and start off by setting it to the letter 0, if that can be even said. All right. Now the next step is to define a variable that'll keep track of the operation that was performed. So I'm going to say state var. I'm going to call it operand. It'll be an NS integer. It's just an int basically. Set it equal to 0. I'll be using numbers to keep, or ints to keep track of whether it was plus, minus, multiply, or divide. I'll do that in a moment. Let's do another state var. I'm going to say this won't be the answer variable, so we'll say answer. It'll be of type double. Set it equal to 0.0. All right. Finally, we need two numbers, so num1 and num2. So like num1 plus num2 equals answer, right? So we'll say state var, call it num1, is of type ns integer. Set that equal to 0. Finally, state var num2 is of type ns integer. Set that equal to 0 as well. All right, so I got all my straight variables ready to go. The only thing I need is to define constants for my operation. So plus, minus, multiply, and divide. So I'm going to say let plus equal 0, let minus equal 1, let multiply equal 2, finally let divide equal 3. All right, now I have all my variables ready to go. I'm going to need one more variable later on, but for now, this is good enough. So now let's start into defining our UI for this calculator. And we're going to be using body again, and by default, body generated hello world. And we'll take advantage of that label as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to need to define a vertical stack like we did last time. So so there's two stack type objects that we can use, vertical stack and horizontal stack, and you can tell what, and the name should imply what type of stack we're dealing with there. We're using vertical to define stuff one above the other. So I'm going to start by defining a VStack. And I'm going to add a little bit of an argument to it this time around. We'll say spacing is 20 pixels, give it a little bit of a gap around it. And then I'll open my curly and put my closing curly at the end of the text call. Hit tab to align it a bit nicer. Change the word hello world to my SwiftUI calculator. All right. Let's slide that up a bit. And now let's add one more label. So we'll say text. It'll be the number. So the number that we defined above, right? This one right here. Now, I don't want to leave it as the bland, boring, simple text labels. So let's add some life to these labels by continuing on the text call. So we'll say text.padding dot foreground color is dot red. So we'll say the title be red. We'll say font will be dot system of size, we'll say 35. And I'm going to do the same for the number, but make that green. So we'll say dot padding dot foreground color will be dot blue. And dot font will be dot system of size, again 35. Let's see if we can play with some some framing around it. So we'll say dot frame the width of 400, height of 40, and what I really wanted was the alignment. I wanted this to be right justified. So this is the main reason why I'm using this. I'll say alignment of dot trailing. So I want this to be right justified, because you can see that the real calculators out there are all on the right, the digits are on the right hand side. So we want to make it like that. All right, let's give it a run and build failed. So we'll see why. All right, so as I was typing, I neglected to notice that state was lowercase. I apologize. Let's make state capital S, a basic error. And let's continue on. I guess I was just so focused on getting these two lines out that slipped over me. So let's give this a run. And there we go. My SwiftUI calculator, we have 0 on the right hand side. And now we're ready to add on our buttons. So what we wanted to do with this screen was have 16 buttons to represent all of the possible states we're going to be working with. And we'll be placing them inside a 4x4 grid. So 4 rows of 4 buttons each. So we're going to need to have, we need to add on to our vertical stack by having a bunch of horizontal stacks. So I'll start with the top row. We'll have our buttons 7, 8, 9, and plus be in its own stack of horizontal configuration, so from left to right. So I'm going to define just below the text here for the number, I'm going to define an HStack. Give it some spacing as well of, let's say, 30. Just has a bit of a gap there. Open up my curlies and start by defining my button. All right. So I'm going to say button, and it'll say action just like last time. And I'll open and close my curly, and then, so this will be our event handler. Well, now what we'll do is we'll define, open a curly, define our text to be 7. But what I want to do is I want to add to this text of 7. All right, so I'll say font weight will be dot bold, and then dot font will be of title. So you can see that we'll use the predefined title settings for this button. We'll say padding, give it some more padding now. Now we're going to introduce a background color of gray for these buttons. So background will be color dot gray, and corner radius, we'll give some rounded corners, will be 5, so a little bit less emphasis compared to the last exercise. All right, and we'll say foreground color will be color dot white, capital C. All right, so we want the text to be white, we want the background to be gray. That's the idea behind it, with rounded corners. And we'll add some padding, because what we want to do is add a border around these buttons, just like we did last time. So we'll say padding of 10. Oops. And say dot overlay. Inside of it, we'll have a rounded rectangle, which will be a corner radius of 5, right? And its line will be modified by dot stroke, which will be color dot gray, and a line width of 5. All right, and the idea behind this is we'll have like a thickness of 5 for the rounded rectangle of a border. All right, and we are missing a rounded a rounded bracket. All right, and just before we continue, there was an error that you saw a moment ago. It's because I had a curly bracket instead of a round bracket, so please make that correction right now. And I took away one extra curly bracket, so you probably want to do that as well. But yeah, basically this should have been a round bracket instead of a curly bracket. I mistyped it by accident, so fix that, and your overlay call should basically be this. All right, with a closing round bracket, 2 closing round brackets here. All right, so we have here our button 7, and if I run this, I'll see a button 7. All right, now do I really want to type this all over again for button 8, 9, and plus, and then the next row and then the next row? No, of course not. So what I want to do is I want to basically take these settings and put them into its own structure. Right, so that we can just call upon these. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to comment this out, this little button call. All right, and yeah, that's the correct curly for there, right? It doesn't like that it's empty, so we're going to fix that in a moment. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce something called a button style. All right, and I'm going to do that outside of this. So I'm going to say struct, call it calc button style. Now notice where I put it. This is the closing curly from my body. All right, and just before struct for preview, I'm introducing a new struct here. All right, calc button style will be of an extension of button style, and I'm going to open up some curlies. All right, now it's going to complain. Let's see what solution it wants to offer us. I'll hit fix. Not what I'm looking for. So it's not always your best friend. What I'm looking for here is a function called make body. So I'm going to type in make body. Now this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to have to fix this. So I'll hit enter. And what I really want to do is make this public, because I want this to be able to use anywhere I want. All right, because it's a nice little configuration there. It's actually public func make body. Configuration will be button style dot configuration, and it will return not this, but some view. All right, and now let's jump into our code for this. So you can see here we wanted to have a bunch of settings that you see above. I'm going to start again and type it by itself. So I'm going to start fresh because I'm going to add a few extra things here. So inside of this, we're going to say configuration dot label, start a new line there, dot font will be dot title, so we had that before, and then dot padding will be 15, dot background will be color dot gray, and then dot corner radius will be 5, dot foreground color, so the text color will be color dot white, All right. And now we want to get into having a rounded rectangle. So we're going to say dot overlay. Actually, before that, we'll add some padding to it. So padding of 10 to have some little spacing for our border. So now I'll say dot overlay will be open a round bracket. So I don't want to make that mistake again. And will be a rounded rectangle. And again, corner radius of 5 with a dot stroke of color dot gray and a line width of 5. All right. Now I don't like that round bracket there. I'm going to actually move it up here because what I want to do is, this is what we had a moment ago, right? All these settings for that 7 button, but I want to add to it. I want to add more to it. Okay. Let's set it up so that we add a little bit of flair, a little bit of effect to this thing. So I'm going to continue on with not overlay. I'm done with overlay. Okay, so I have my closing round bracket for overlay. But I'm going to say dot compositing group. And I'm going to add a shadow to my button. So I'm going to say dot shadow. And I'll take the second one, but it's not exactly what I want. So color will be dot black, so a little bit of a black shadow. Radius, I'll say, will be 3 pixels behind. So 3 pixels down and back from it. But I don't need the X and Y. That's all I need for shadow. And then opacity, I want to fade out the button when it's pressed. Okay, so I'm going to say opacity, and we're going to add a little bit of a pseudo event handler, kind of like tying in a mini event handler into this, but it's already built in. It's kind of nice here. We're going to say opacity. Now, opacity, we'll set it to be dependent on whether the button's been pressed or not. So we'll say configuration dot is pressed. Now we'll check to see if it's pressed. If it's true, we'll set the opacity to 0.5. Otherwise, if it's not pressed, the opacity will be 1.0. So fully visible versus being half visible when it's pressed. So we'll fade it out a bit when you click it. Now, one more effect we'll add to this will be a scale effect. All right. Inside scale effect, we'll set it so that it shrinks a little bit when you press it. So I'll say again, configuration dot is pressed. We'll check to see if it's pressed. If it's pressed, let's shrink it a little bit down to 0.8. Otherwise, 1.0. All right. And so now we have our basically our style here. Now it looks like I have everything I need. That's a closing bracket there. Now let's apply this to our button number 7 and see what happens. So now I can simplify my button 7 call. So I have that. It doesn't like that it's empty. So I'm actually going to put it down here. There's my HStack. I'll leave that in there just for notes. And I'm going to say button. Now, button, I'm going to take a different definition to button than we did before, because I want to take advantage of button style and also define my label at the same time. So button will be 7. Open and close the curly, right, for my event handler, which will come later. And then say dot button style will be calc button style instantiated. All right, let's do that again. So button will be 8 this time. Open and close my event handler curly, and then say dot button style will be calc button style. Do it for 9. So button 9. Open and close my curly, and then we'll say dot button style will be calc button style again, instantiated, and finally button we'll do it for plus. Open and close my curly, And then dot button style will be calc button style instantiated. Okay, so these are what my buttons are supposed to look like, 7, 8, 9 plus, in a horizontal stack, which is defined above here. Let's give it a run and see what it looks like. So there we go, 7, 8, 9 plus. Notice that the button shrinks a little bit and fades a little bit when you click it. All right, so since we're at it, let's add this. Let's add the remaining buttons. Now I've got my horizontal stack for this. I don't really want to type this over and over again. I think I'll get rid of this and just copy and paste. I want this whole block again. All right, I want that whole block. So Command C to copy, Command V to paste. And so my next horizontal stack will be for buttons 4, 5, 6, and a minus. And if I paste again, all right, now it'll be for 1, 2, 3. This will be a multiply. And finally, so we did 1, 2, 3 and multiply. Now we have here C for clear, 0, equal sign, and finally slash for divide. All right. So now in this case, we have all of our buttons that we're going to use. So I'm just going to hit run and verify. There it is. There's my entire calculator. It's kind of centered. Maybe I want to push it up a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push this up a bit. So I'm going to hit stop, and I've got all my stacks in play. This curly here, so this curly here represents the closing curly for the horizontal stack. This represents the closing curly for the vertical stack. Now what I'll do is continue on this vertical stack with a dot frame of, I'm going to throw some numbers out. So width will be 600, height will be 800. I'm just throwing numbers out because really what I want is the alignment to be dot top. And if I run that again, pushed more up. There's a few other things you could do. You could play with the background colors and see what happens. I'll leave that to you to play around with, but for now, this is how I want to set up the UI. All right, so now that we have the UI all set up, that now we can add our logic. And the question is, where does our how will we add our logic? So now we'll go back to the code and incorporate it into our content view.swift. Okay, so now let's add in some methods to handle our event handling. Okay, let's start with the digits. So we have here 7, 8, 9. We want to be able to enter some digits. So I'm going to add in a new method. So I'll put it right here, just before the closing curly for the body. And we're going to say func, call it pressNum. And inside of it, we'll pass in an argument of type string. And now what we'll do is, we want to do is append to the number. So really what we're saying is self.thenumber plus equals n. All right, that's it. And if you really wanted to, well, I'll save that argument for a minute from now. But basically, we're talking about the leading zero. So I'll leave it for now, and then you'll see what I'm going to do to fix the leading zero in a moment. Now what we need to do is apply this method to our event handler. Okay, so I'll start at 7. All right, so inside the curlies for 7, we're going to say, Remember, we have to use self. So self dot press num. We're going to pass in 7. In fact, I'm not going to type this over and over again, so I'm going to copy and paste this line into each of the curlies and just change 7 to be its corresponding digit. So that's 8. That's 9. All right, and then when I go to 4, 5, and 6, there's 5, and there's 6. All right, and then 1, 2, and 3. Finally, 0. All right, now let's give this a run and see if those buttons work. So 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and a 0. And like I was saying earlier, the leading 0, not really fun to have there. Let's fix that leading 0. So the trick with the leading 0 is to check to see if it's already a 0. So we'll go back to press num. We'll check to see if self.thenumber is already equal to 0. Then we'll say self.thenumber equals n. Otherwise, or else, self.thenumber plus equals n. All right. So now we have press num. Now we're checking to see if it's a 0 already. If it is, just replace it with the digit. Otherwise, just append to it. If we run it again. All right. There you go. Okay. So now we got rid of the leading 0. Now the next step is to save our operand, save our operation. Okay. So now let's move into the plus, minus, multiply, and divide and save the status that was pressed at this point after they've entered the first digit. So what we want to do is we want to be able to save the first number upon pressing plus, minus, multiply, and divide. So I'm going to introduce a new method called save num1. So we'll say func save num1. And we'll say num1 is equal to the number. But we'll have an issue with that because num1 is an int. The number is a string. We need to cast it to be an int. Shouldn't have any issues with the cast because we're controlling what the number is. It doesn't like that enough. So we need to unwrap this optional. I'll just go with what it's recommending because it has a little dot inside the octagon there. It's saying apply a question, or sorry, yeah, an exclamation mark. So hit fix, and there we go. All right, and let's reset the number back to 0. All right. So now we have here save num1. Now let's apply save num1 to plus, minus, multiply, and divide. So we're going to scroll back up to our operands. Operand buttons, that is. I'll start at the top. So there's our plus. So 7, 8, 9 plus. So what we'll do here is say self.operand is equal to self.plus. And then self.save num1. All right. We'll do the same with minus. So we'll say self.operand is equal to self.minus and self.save num1. All right, moving down to multiply, I will say self.operand is equal to self.multiply and self.save num1. And finally, our event handler for the divide is self.operand equals self.divide and self.save num1. Okay, so we have here our plus, minus, multiply, and divide. They're going to save the operation and reset back to 0. I mean, you could run and verify that it resets back to 0. Let's do a quick check. If I say 7 plus, we're assuming it's save num1 because it reset back to 0. The trick now is to just enter some new digits and hit equal sign, and also have the option for clear. So let's start with clear, fixing clear, and then we'll deal with their equal sign last. Okay, so we're going to introduce another event handler, or something for our event handler for clear num. So I'm going to introduce another method, that is. Correct myself there. We'll say func clear num. And all it's going to do is say the number equals 0. I could have just dumped this right into the button C, which is actually just up here. I actually should pause for a sec, let you digest that. So clear num, the number equals 0. Now scroll back up, look for my C button, which is right here, and call self.clearNum. All right, so that's my clear button. Now, let's jump into our equal sign, all right, and actually calculate this thing. Okay, so now let's create a method called calculate. I'll put it up here. So we'll say func calculate. All right, now we're going to save num2. We'll say num2 equals the number, but we know that this alone is no good. We have to cast it to an int. And throw an exclamation mark into it. Now we'll basically calculate our answer by saying if operand equals plus, then answer equals num1 plus num2. But it won't like that. It's going to complain because we're saying int plus an int cannot equal a double. It wants us to cast. So double of int plus int. So we'll go with that. Say if operand equals minus. Then we'll say answer equals num1 minus num2. It's going to complain. I'm going to let it do the auto completing. We'll say if operand equals multiply, then answer equals num1 times num2. Let it complain. There we go. Finally, divide. If operand equals divide, and answer equals num1 divided by num2. Let it complain and hit fix. All right, so this is a good start. Let's see if it actually applies the answer. But before we do, well, we calculate the answer, we actually have to fish it back to our label. So we need to do one last thing outside of the ifs, is to say the number equals answer, but answer is a double, needs to be converted to a string. Okay, now we need to be able to call this thing and give it a shot and see if we can do our actual calculations. All right, so I'm going to switch up to my equal sign and say self dot calculate. Okay. Now let's give it a run. So if I say 7 plus 9 equals 16, should hit clear. 8 minus 5 equals 3, hit clear. 3 times 2 is 6, hit clear. Let's try 3 divided by 8 equals 0. That's not right. Well, now we have a bug. So 3 divided by 8 is not a 0. The issue here is that we let autocomplete guide everything. So let's look at what's happening here. We're saying int divided by int is equal to a double. So we're saying int divided by int. Ints don't deal with decimal spaces, so it's going to chop off the decimal spaces, then cast to double. So we need to fix that by casting the individual numbers to doubles. So we'll say double of num1 divided by double of num2. All right, let's give it a shot again. All right, so we'll say 3 divided by 8 equals 0.375. Now, let's do one last one. So 3 divided by 0 equals infinity. So in older iOS versions, it didn't handle divide by 0 very well. And we should probably account for such an error. We don't want any app crashes to happen. It's a perfect way to segue into having an alert box pop up. You've seen alert boxes and action sheets pop up on your apps that you've played with on your phones. Why not learn how to make one? So now let's jump into this final step of learning how to make one. All right, so this last part will be about showing an alert box if the user tries to divide by 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce one more state variable at the top here. This will keep track of whether or not we should show an alert box. So I'm going to say state private var equal called showing alert. We'll set it equal to false. Okay, so we don't need to show the alert. Now, let's jump back to our calculation where we do the division. All right, so back in our calculate method, we say answer equals num1 divided by num2. We should really test to see if num2 is 0 first of all. So we're going to say if num2 equals 0, we'll set showing alert equal to true and answer equal to 0. All right. Else, we'll say showing alert equals false, which it really is, but we'll just do it just in case. And we keep our answer equals num1 divided by num2. All right. Now that we have this, how do we apply it? That's the question. So now we have this variable called showing alert, the state variable called showing alert. We want this to play a role in whether or not we show an alert box during our division. So let's go back to our equal sign. All right. There is button equal sign. All right. We have self.calculate. We have button style as calc button style. Now, I want to continue on from this button style, calc button style, for the equal sign by saying dot alert, and then open a round bracket and saying is presented. There's our argument. So is presented will be the variable showing alert. But we have to actually use the $sign in front of it. So $sign showing alert. Now I'm going to modify this. You could do it this way, but I'm going to just close the round bracket, open some curlies, and inside the curlies, now we'll actually generate an alert. So we'll say alert, and open the round bracket, and what we'll do is we'll use title, message, and dismiss button. So title, message, dismiss button. There's more, you can experiment with all of these. So title will be actually of type text, so text, error. And then message will be text of cannot divide by 0. Right? Dismiss button will be dot. It needs to have a dot default. So every button must have a dot default, and inside that dot default we'll do another text called got it. All right. So this is how an alert button is now presented, or alert box is now presented. There's less coding, but it's very different from the alert boxes you're accustomed to with UIKit. All right, so now what's left is to run this and try and attempt to divide by 0. Okay, if I do 9 divided by 0 equals, so it's set it to 0.0, saying error, cannot divide by 0. My button's going to be got it. And there you go. So now we built our first calculator app, our second application in this course on learning to build iPhone apps using SwiftUI. Again, no drag and drop, no UIKit, pure code here to do everything. We've learned how to play with horizontal stacks. We've learned how to create button styles and apply them instead of having to type in the button characteristics over and over and over again. We also learned how to add a little bit of flair, a little bit of effect to our buttons, having it shrink and grow, having it fade a bit upon clicking. We learned how to do extra methods, call them within our buttons. We also learned how to handle divide by zeros by popping up an alert with the issue to tell the user. So we've done a lot here. All right. So now move on to the next video, and we'll continue on with our journey on SwiftUI. Take care. Bye for now.